Hey, Todd Brown here, creator of the E5 method. So I've got a treat for you in this video. I'm going to share a private presentation with you that I delivered to my top one private client and mastermind group some time ago. Now, this is a group of a little bit less than 50 entrepreneurs doing a little bit over $400 million a year in sales. And the topic that they wanted me to cover is how do I and my team approach rolling out new marketing campaigns and making them work. In other words, turning those new campaigns into gold. What are the numbers that we look at, the ratios that we look at? What are the levers that we pull to dial in campaigns? And the presentation was pretty surprising to the majority of our clients. And I think you're going to find it to be eye-opening as well. I've included the entire presentation for you. And so let's dive in. Enjoy. Now, I am going to save some time in the end. I'm going to go for about 45 minutes. Then I'm going to save some time in the end for any questions that you may have about this process, about this thinking. I don't want you to feel like you've got to understand every detail or every nuance of this, because a lot of the details in the doing, in the action, are going to come in the rest of our time together. So this is all about how do we take a campaign and how do we make it gold? And so let's start with, what do I mean in this context in terms of make it gold? What do I mean by make it gold? Well, in this context, I'm focusing primarily on your front-end campaigns, your buyer acquisition, client acquisition campaigns. And in this context, make it gold means that we get your CPA to AOV ratio, what it costs you to acquire a buyer, to what the buyer is worth to you the day that they become a buyer, right? We get that ratio where we need it to be through a methodical approach to optimization. So for us in our world, right, when it comes to buyer acquisition, right, when our cost to revenue is where we want it to be, right? And that's different for everybody. There are folks on here that maybe are only they're not willing to go negative on the front. They only want to be break even. They want, if they spend $1 on media or on traffic, they want to generate $1 in sales. There are some people out there, some entrepreneurs in the wild, for whatever crazy reason, they want to invest $1 for every dollar in traffic. They want to generate $1.20 or whatever, or $1.30, right? In their mind, not realizing that they're sacrificing the amount of customers that they acquire. But for us, right, make it gold means we take a campaign and we get it to a point where the cost and the revenue, the CPA and the AOV is where we need it to be. And we've talked about this. Those of you that have been in top one for a while now, those of you that are on your second year, third year, whatever, you've heard me talk about this ratio so many times. And that's because this is at the heart and soul of our ability to scale big and to scale fast. At the end of the day, you've heard me say so many times that we are investors. As entrepreneurs, as direct response driven entrepreneurs, we're investors. We're investing in the acquisition of assets. Those assets are our buyers, our clients, our students, our customers. Those assets, just like any other investment out there, there is a cost to acquire that asset and there is a value to that asset. The difference between the cost and the value determines ultimately whether it's a good investment or not. And certainly the quicker we can earn our money back, the quicker we can get, we can return 100% of our investment as we're acquiring buyers, the faster we can grow, the faster we can turn those dollars over. And so making it gold means we get our cost and our AOV, our CPA and our AOV, to the ratio that we need it to be. Now, for reference, and if you've got a question about this, save it for the end. But for reference, in our world, we do not use a true maximum cost per acquisition. So in this context, a true maximum cost per acquisition is, there are a lot of entrepreneurs out there that will say they predetermine I'm only willing to spend $100 to acquire a buyer. That is like, I'm only willing to like have my CPA be $100, and everything that every traffic channel that we use, whether it's Facebook, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Google, whether it's native, whatever, we have to be able to acquire buyers at a maximum cost of $100. Now, there's nothing wrong with that approach. It is a very common approach when looking at making something gold, or when looking at scaling campaigns, but we do not use a true maximum cost per acquisition. We simply want our CPA to AOV ratio to be within a certain range. And that certain range means that it allows us to acquire buyers at or below a predetermined allowable investment. Let me make this real simple for you. Let me simplify this for you. If I said to you, what are you willing to pay? What are you willing to go out of pocket? What are you willing to take out of your bank account to acquire a buyer? Knowing what a buyer goes on to spend with you, knowing what after you get a buyer, right, there is a 30-day value. That is 30 days after they become a buyer. What is the average buyer in your business worth? 60 days after they become a buyer, what is the average buyer worth? 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and so on. We hear the term, lifetime value or marginal net worth, right? That's just about like, what's the value of a buyer over the life of their patronage. My point in sharing this is that what would you be willing to invest to get a buyer? And when I say invest, I don't mean the CPA. I mean, what would you be willing to take out of your bank account and give in order to get a buyer, knowing what it is that they go on to spend with you over the next 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months, right? When we sat back as a company, Damien and I and the leadership team, John and Teddy, and we looked at, well, for 1,000 buyers, knowing what the average buyer goes on and spends with us, what would we be willing to spend? And so you could think about this for a second for yourself. If I said to you, I can give you 1,000 buyers into your database, 1,000 people that are in your marketplace that meet your criteria, that are buyers, not leads, right? But these are quality individuals. These are buyers. What would you be willing to invest for 1,000 of those people? Would you be willing to invest 30,000, 20,000, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000? What is that number, right? Because what that number ultimately tells you is what you would be willing to invest to get a single buyer. In essence, it tells you this predetermined allowable investment. Predetermined allowable investment, meaning we've determined that we are willing to go, let's say I'm going to give you this example. We are willing to go out of pocket. We are willing to take out of our bank account, let's call it for argument's sake, $30 to acquire a new buyer, right? We're willing to go come out of the bank account $30. Well, what I want you to understand, going back to that, we don't use a true maximum CPA. We use an AOV CPA range. We use a CPA AOV ratio. This means when you have that predetermined allowable investment, that the CPA can be almost anything as long as the AOV is high enough to keep us at that predetermined allowable investment. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, if we're willing to invest that predetermined allowable investment, if we're willing to invest $30 to acquire a new buyer because we know what they go on to spend in month 1, 2, 3, 6, blah, 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 right? Well, that means that we can have a CPA of 100 as long as our AOV is 70, or we can have a CPA of 150 as long as our AOV is 120. We can have a CPA of 200 as long as we have an AOV of 170. We can pay a CPA of 250 as long as we have an AOV of 220. You see how this is not based on a true maximum CPA. This is based on our predetermined allowable investment, right? Now, ultimately, on this list, what I'll tell you, just for reference, file this away. We can talk about this at some other point. If you've got a question about it, you can ask it later. I'm sure we're going to cover it at some point over the next handful of days. But out of these right here, the 100 CPA, 70 AOV, 150 CPA, 120 AOV, 200 CPA, 170 AOV, 250 CPA, 220 AOV, they're really all the same thing in terms of the investment to acquire a buyer, right? In this case, in each of those examples, we're able to acquire a buyer for $30, we're going negative 30, we're taking 30 out of the bank. Each of those are the same. However, the biggest opportunity lies with the higher CPA, right? So the more that you can afford to pay to get a buyer, the easier this game becomes. And so it's a lot easier to acquire buyers if you can afford a CPA of 250 compared to if you can only afford a CPA of 100, right? So in an ideal universe, you are able to hit your predetermined allowable investment, right, at the highest CPA possible. And I want you later, I want you to circle that, to note that, what it is that I just said. And I want you to ponder that, because for those in this group, that alone, that little insight can be a massive game changer for you, right? We want to be able to hit our predetermined allowable investment, whatever we decided we're willing to go, which is based on value and cash flow and all that. But we want to be able to do it at the highest CPA possible. Because the higher the CPA, the easier the game becomes. You've heard it said before so many times that he or she who can invest the most to acquire a new buyer wins. Well, he or she who can invest the most, right, has the easier time acquiring a buyer. If one company can only afford to invest $100 to get a buyer, and another company can afford to invest $250 to get a buyer, that company who can afford to invest $250 has a much easier time and a much greater advantage. And so this is how we think about our campaigns. When we look at a campaign, right, it's kind of like our very first objective is to get our CPA AOV within range so that we are paying that predetermined allowable investment. But long term, the game is then to increase that CPA AOV as much as possible. We want to be able to spend more. Our aim is to be able to spend more and more to acquire a buyer, meaning to be able to get that CPA higher and higher and higher and higher. And so we focus long term on increasing the AOV. Right? But initially, it's all about getting that ratio where we need it to be so that we are able to acquire buyers at our predetermined allowable investment. Now, you guys know that, right? Because you've heard me talk about this before, and this is all build up to the 3 steps. So, right, this is all build up to the 3 steps. So, you've heard me say this before, and many of you already know this because you're super savvy marketers and entrepreneurs, that this is when it comes to acquisition, when it comes to acquiring buyers, clients, students, customers, it's a game of manipulating CPA and AOV, right? It's just like an investment. It's just like, right? I don't care whether it's a piece of real estate, right? Like you go to Joe, whether it's, a property, whatever, there is a cost to acquire the investment, CPA, and there is a value, the return, the cash that we get back, the revenue that we get back on the other side. And every investment is determined by that balance, right? If we can lower the cost, increase our return, right, it becomes a better investment. If the cost goes up and our return goes down, it doesn't, it moves in the opposite direction. And so I'm sharing this with you because, right, making a campaign gold, getting a campaign into the proper range is all about lowering CPA and increasing AOV. It could be lowering a CPA a little bit, increasing AOV a lot. It could be lowering CPA a lot, increasing AOV a little. It could be a little bit of both, each. It's just a scale. That's how you have to look at it. It's just a scale. Now, on the CPA side, on the cost side, there are some factors at play. There are things like the cost of media, right? The cost of media, how much it costs us to get a visitor, let's just say, for example, right, impacts how much it costs us to acquire a buyer. Right? It doesn't impact how much the buyer spends with us. So if we're paying $4 to get a visitor, or we're paying $8 to get a visitor, or paying $5 a visitor, none of that changes how much a visitor spends with us, right? But that will ultimately play a role in how much it costs us to acquire a buyer, right? All else being equal, if we're paying $8 a visitor versus $4, we're going to be paying double, all else being equal, to acquire that buyer. And so the cost of media impacts our cost per acquisition. So does sales conversion rate, right? Because if you convert 1% of people into buyers and you go from 1% to 2%, you just cut your cost per acquisition in half, right? When it comes to sales conversion rate, if you spend whatever it is that you spend on traffic, the cost of the traffic is right. Once it's done, you spent X number of dollars. You spent $5 getting a visitor, right? You got 1,000 visitors. You spent $5,000 to get those 1,000 visitors. That cost is what the cost is. But now, how well you convert those people into buyers is ultimately going to determine your CPA. The higher your sales conversion rate goes, the lower your cost per acquisition goes. Same thing with order form completion rate, meaning like, right, there are folks that will, they have a video sales letter, or they have a long form sales letter, and they get, whatever, 10% of people to click on the add to cart button or whatnot and go over to the order form. And then they have a 99% abandonment rate or a 90% abandonment rate or something like that. And so, right, that impacts cost per acquisition. If we have if we take that 90%, order form abandonment rate and we cut it, let's go extreme and say we cut it in half, right? We are slashing our cost per acquisition. So these are factors that impact the cost. On the AOV side, of course, there are things like offer pricing, right? Like offer pricing. If you're selling one product, for example, and that product is $50. If you're selling one product, you don't have any bumps, upsells, nothing like that. You're selling one product at $50. Well, of course, you're going to have an AOV, an average order value of $50. You're only selling one product. That product is $50. And when somebody buys, that's the only thing that they can buy. They can't, there's nothing left, right? So the average order value is 50. If you change the pricing from 50 to 60, well, now automatically your AOV is 60. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have an impact on the other side, sales conversion rate. But my point is that the price of your offers has an impact on AOV, right? This is why, look, the reality is that just to show you how much of a game of moving these levers this is, and I want to be careful here for time, and I don't want to take you too far down a rabbit hole, but look, this is a balance of, let's say, conversion rate on one side and offer pricing on another side. So you may have a 10% sales conversion rate if you're selling a low ticket item, right? Like you might 10% sales conversion rate selling a $10 product. You may also have a 1% sales conversion rate selling a $2,000 product. Well, in the 1%, right? So your cost per acquisition when you go to the $2,000 product may go up quite significantly because of how much lower you've dropped the sales conversion rate, but your AOV will take a massive leap, more than enough to compensate for that. See, so my point in just sharing that is it's a game of manipulating CPA to AOV, right? And the reality is you're going to learn, and you're going to get a whole bunch of implementable, actionable tactics and strategies to use throughout our time together, this experience, right? It's just a game of balancing this. It's taking off a little here, putting a little more here, putting a little bit more here, taking off here, balancing it. And so, right, at the end of the day, I'm sharing this because it is keeping out in front of you. Make it gold is all about getting the CPA to AOV to where we need it to be so that we are acquiring buyers at that allowable investment. There's things like the bump offer. Like bump offer on an order form, bump offer. Those of you that have implemented bump offers on your front end offers, that a bump offer, right, can changes the AOV, right? Bump offer you have a $20 bump offer, let's say, and you have a 10% take rate on that. It's probably a terrible example in this group, but $20 bump offer, 10% take rate, that means it adds $2 to AOV. $2 might not seem like a significant amount to some of you who are selling high ticket, but on a low ticket campaign, that could be the difference between not so good and getting much better. And so bump offer and upsells, right? And so these are the things that we use to manipulate these two, CPA and AOV, right? Under CPA, you see those things. Under AOV, you see these things. Our goal is to bring CPA down. Our goal is to bring AOV up, and it's some combination of those two. Now, look, and now we're getting into the heart of this, and the rest will be fairly easy and straightforward. But this is the key, and this is what Damien was referring to earlier, that this is the way that we think. If the CPA to AOV ratio is not where we need it to be. If it's not where we need it to be, if it's not where we want it to be, well, we need to assess why. What you do not want to do, and what I see on a regular basis from folks out in the wild and new clients that come into our tribe, is they base their decision on assumptions, feelings, right? They're doing things, they're operating subjectively, right? I think it's the offer. Right. And usually if they'll say to me, if it's on a call or a conference or Q&A time or whatever, and I say, why? And they'll say, just because I'm just from what, folks have told me, it's the offer, right? That's all meaningless, right? It's all meaningless. The beauty of the direct response, a direct response driven business, is that it's all data driven. It's all numbers driven. We try not to make decisions subjectively, right? Because my opinion, your opinion, right? We get together, our leadership team gets together, our marketing team gets together. Damien's got an idea. John's got an idea. I got an idea. Teddy has a vastly different idea. We all think our idea is great and right and the best and whatnot. None of that matters. What matters is the numbers. And so what we're going to do is now we're going to diagnose what the problem is. And we're going to do the best we can to identify what is the issue. Why? So that we are able to optimize that real issue. Right? That's our game. Our game is thinking like a doctor. You go in and you've got a pain, you've got an issue, right? The doctor doesn't immediately just, all right, take this pill here. Well, some doctors may, but right, a good doctor is gonna ask questions, is gonna dig, is gonna assess, is gonna diagnose. And that's what we are attempting to do here. We're attempting to understand what is going on. And then once we understand what is going on and we narrow it down to what is the cause, then we can focus our optimization efforts on that cause. That's how we then make it gold. So making it gold, the actual implementable tactical stuff, we're going to cover over these 3 days. Right now, what I'm about to cover for you are the 3 steps for how you identify what the source of the problem is. What is the cause behind the inadequate CPA to AOV ratio? So 3 steps to make it gold. Step 1, and these are questions, right? So these are questions that you ask yourself, and then we look for the answer. So the very first question that I ask is, right, and let me take a step back for 1 second and say this, that what I want you to do, you certainly can follow this system to the T, the way that I lay it out for you. There is some nuance to this, which we certainly can talk about, but I want you to pay attention to the approach and the thinking, okay? The approach and the thinking, high level. So number 1, is it an economic issue? Or is it a performance issue? So what do I mean by that? Well, an economic issue is when the funnel assets, and I use the word funnel here intentionally, the funnel assets are performing well. They're performing properly, but the CPA to AOV ratio is still off. Meaning, right, you've got a 4 or 5% sales conversion on the front end. Like you've got the pages, the stages of your campaign are performing the way that they're supposed to be performing, right? But the AOV to CPA ratio is off. So meaning that you could make the case, you could say it this way to simplify this for you guys, that it's not a marketing issue, meaning we're converting well, we're upselling well, we've got a great take rate on our bump offer. Like all of those pieces are performing the way that they are supposed to be performing, but yet the CPA to AOV ratio is still off. That's an economic issue. Whereas a performance issue is when one or more funnel assets, steps, stages, pages, pieces are not performing properly, meaning they are underperforming, meaning they're not at the level of performance that you know they should be at. So you've got, let's say, a bump offer that has a 3% take rate. You've got an upsell that has a 6% take rate or something like that. You've got these pieces, you've got a VSL that is converting at 0.25% or something like that. That is clearly an example of a marketing asset or a funnel asset that is not performing properly. And so that's the difference between, right? So you're almost stepping back and asking yourself, is the marketing performing the way it's supposed to, or is it not? is right. Is it an economic thing, which I'm going to explain in just a second, or is it a marketing thing? And so let's look at an extreme example of an economic issue. So let's say we've got an ad campaign and it's costing us $10 to get a visitor in this example. And I just want you to get the idea behind this example. I don't want you to diagnose the specific numbers here. So we've got a $10 cost per visitor. And so that means that we get 100 visitors and it costs us $1,000. So we got $1,000 in media cost. Now, let's say we're selling a $49 core offer, right? So a low ticket thing here. We got a bump offer on the order form, which is $39. We've got an upsell that's $199. And then we've got a second upsell that is $497. And let's say our core offer is converting at 4%, which is reasonable from cold traffic. You could make the case, some of you could make the case, right? Maybe, well, we can get it up to 5% or 6% or 7%, or that's what we commonly do. Others, for you might say 4% is really high. Let's say on the bump offer, we got a 30% take rate. Let's say on the upsell, number one, we got a 20% take rate. And let's say on upsell two, we've got a 15% take rate. Okay. This means that on this campaign, we've acquired 4 buyers. 4 buyers means we've got a cost per acquisition of $250, right? $1,000 divided by the 4 buyers means it costs us $250 to acquire a buyer. But if you look at this, there is an AOV of 175. There's 175. That is a $75 deficit. Meaning in this case, we would be going negative $75 to acquire a buyer. And I'm not saying that that is right or wrong for you. For some of you, $75 to go negative to acquire a buyer, totally cool. Some of you, that's insane, ludicrous. What I want you to see here, what I want you to understand is that this is an economic issue because our marketing assets are performing well. Our marketing assets are performing well, meaning it's not, you can't go to the marketing team and say, what the heck are you guys doing? Right? We're paying only 100 and, we're paying 250 and you guys are only collecting 175, right? The marketing assets are performing at a more than reasonable level. And so this to us becomes an economic issue. The thing that I want you to understand, and we're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to break this down a little bit, is that we do not try to attempt to fix an economic issue with better marketing funnel assets. In other words, one of the big mistakes that I see folks make is they don't realize that they say, our campaign, our CPA to AOV ratio is not where it needs to be. They might not use that language, but you get the point. And then they'll say, but we are, and we're converting at 8% on the front end on the core offer. And so we want to design a new offer, right? And I let them know that you're not going to fix that. Like, what do you expect? What are you expecting from your marketing? Are you expecting a 12% conversion, a 15% conversion? What are you expecting from your marketing? Right? The reality, you have to have reasonable expectations for the performance of marketing. And you do not want to try to fix economic issues with better marketing funnel assets. You want to fix economic issues with economic moves. And so if it is, call it step 2. If it is an economic issue, we're going to go back in a second to what if it's a performance issue. But if it is an economic issue, meaning that your marketing assets are performing the way that they're supposed to be performing, but the CPA to AOV ratio is off, then we have to ask, well, is it a media performance issue or is it a pricing issue? What do I mean by media performance issue? I mean that is your media buying, your ads, are they performing the way that they're supposed to be performing, right? Are your, so let me simply say, right? We'll say this. Are we paying more for traffic than we should be? Right? Is ultimately what we want to look at. Like, are we paying more for traffic than what that traffic is actually worth in the marketplace? And so how do we assess that? Well, we just look at 2 things, really. Number one is, are we targeting the correct audience, right? So some of this, of course, this is when I said earlier, nuance is subjective to some extent, right? And I know I said we want to move away from subjectivity as much as we can. We're never going to move completely away from some subjective decisions, but are we targeting the right audience? So are we putting our ads out in front of the correct audience? And are our ads getting the click-through rate that they need to be getting? Or we're looking to see if any one of these are off the mark. Why are we looking? I want you to understand the context of this, right? We're looking to see, are we targeting the right people? And if we believe that we're targeting the right people, are our ads getting a reasonable click-through rate? Because, right, ultimately what we're trying to see is if we're paying a lot for a visitor. Remember, in that example, I said, what did I say? We were paying $10 a visitor, right? We're paying $10 a visitor. Let me just go back real quick to this bad boy, right over here. So I said we were paying $10 a visitor. So over here, right, we have a CPA of $250. Well, okay, so why is our CPA so high? Right. Well, we're paying $10 a visitor. That's an economic issue. Okay. So is it a media performance issue? Meaning, are we paying $10 a visitor because our media stinks, our creative, our images, our headline, our copy, or is it a pricing issue, which I'll explain in a second. So in order to look at our media, I'm going to look at, are we targeting the right people, and are we is our click-through rate where it needs to be? So if the answer is yes, like, yeah, we're targeting, we believe that we're targeting the right people. We've always targeted these people, and our click-through rate is reasonable. Then here's what I want you to understand. I want you to get this context, and I want you to listen to me carefully. We've arrived at a point where we may be dealing with just an escalating cost of media, an escalating cost of traffic. In other words, recognize this. We've got a campaign that has assets, in the example that I showed you, that are performing well. We've got a good sales conversion, a good sales conversion rate. We've got a good bump offer take rate. We've got a good upsell 1 take rate. We've got a good upsell 2 take rate. Those prices are right. Like the performance of our marketing assets is good. The performance of our media is good. We're targeting the right people. Our click-through rates are good. So look, from a pure performance perspective, right? From a pure performance perspective, all of our assets on the media side and on the funnel side are performing the way that they are supposed to, but yet we are still paying an arm and a leg for a visitor. At this point, I lean towards, all right, so now what we have to do is we have to be able to afford the escalating cost of media. Now we have to be able to pay for that higher cost of media, because we're doing a good job on the media side in terms of targeting, in terms of click-through rate, right? If the click-through rate is there, is where it's supposed to be, that means our creative is good, right? Our funnel assets, our sales page, our marketing and sales page is working well. Our bump offer is working well. Our upsell is working well. Our upsell number 2 is working well, right? And so those things are all working well, yet the price is still high for a visitor. Here is where what we would do is we would test offer pricing. We would test the price on offers, knowing that, right, that as you test a higher price point, that sales conversion rate could come down. That's okay. There is a point where, right, you can raise price, sales conversion rate could come down, raise price, and it'll make the numbers work. Like if the numbers don't work, if AOV, CPA doesn't work, right, for you, what that means ultimately is that you don't have a viable campaign. So our first order of priority to have a viable campaign, to make it gold, is to get that ratio. It's not about, I want to hold on to my 10% sales conversion rate. Who cares if you have a 10% sales conversion rate, but your AOV and CPA ratio is off the mark? Therefore, you can't run with it. Who cares what the sales conversion rate is? What you should care about, the whole game, the whole deciding factor is, what are we investing and what is it worth to us? What's the CPA and what is the AOV? So here we test offer pricing. And where I recommend you start this offer pricing is on the right side. And so meaning I would start by testing the price on upsell number 1. Then I would go to upsell number 2. Then I would go to your bump. And then finally, I would test the price on your core offer. Why do we save the price testing on the core offer for last? Because the price of the core offer has a direct connection to sales conversion rate. So ultimately, I know if we doubled or tripled, let's say we doubled the price on the core offer, or tripled the price, whatever, well, our sales conversion rate is going to come down. And with a front-end campaign, that means that we're acquiring less buyers. So I want to save the core offer and testing price on that offer for last, so that we can leave the conversion rate where it is right now. Right where it is. And I want to see if we can make up the deficit by changing the pricing on the other side of the equation. So we're not playing around with sales conversion rate, or we're not impacting sales conversion rate. We're impacting the value of the buyer through AOV, right? Through the other side, through the transaction maximization offers. And so hope that makes sense for everybody. If you got a question for that, I'm gonna be wrapping up in about 10 minutes, and we'll you can fire that away. So we start with we start with the upsell number one, and then go to upsell two if you've got an upsell two, and then the bump offer. The reason also why we save the price testing on the bump offer until after the upsells is because that can have a direct impact on order form completion, which can also have an impact on overall sales conversion rate and CPA. So I want to try to make it work by price testing on the upsell number one first, which is the biggie in the campaign, then upsell two, then go back to the bump, and then the core offer. And I want you to remember here, like I said already, that what we are looking for here is AOV contribution. What I mean by that is that if we tested, let's say we at $199, we have a 10% sales conversion rate, and we raise the price to $399, just as an example. We go from $199 to $399, and our sales conversion rate comes down 2%. Well, if that $399 at 8% sales conversion rate is contributing more to average order value than is the $199 at 10%, that's the one that we're going to go with. We're going to go with the one that contributes the most amount to AOV. We're going to go with the one, in other words, performance. You decide whether a price test with the upsell one, upsell two is effective, is successful when it contributes more money to AOV. It is not determined by how much it increases conversion rate. It is determined by how much it increases AOV, how much it contributes to AOV. And so to keep cruising, here is an example of what I would consider not an economic issue. So let's say we're paying $4 a visitor, meaning we get 100 visitors. It costs us $400 now to get those 100 visitors. Let's say we've got the same exact setup here in terms of our offers, but we got a 4% sales conversion rate on the core offer still. We've got a 10% now take rate on the bump offer. We got an 8% take rate on upsell one, and we got a 3% take rate on upsell two. Well, this is the same for buyers. Here we've got a CPA of 100. You could see here, right, just as an example, that our cost of media, which is something I said to you guys early on, our cost of media dropped in half. Our cost dropped. No, it dropped more than in half. It dropped from $10 to $4 here. And we acquired the same amount of buyers. You could see here that, so our CPA dropped substantially. In the prior example, it was $250. Here it is 100, right? We spent 400. We got 4 buyers. That's $100 cost per acquisition. Here, in this case, we have an AOV of $88.73. We are still at a $21.27 deficit. But this is what I want you to notice compared to the prior example, is that this is not an economic issue at this point because we have marketing assets that are underperforming. So we've got an, upsell number one that's, only at 8%. We've got upsell number two that's only at 3%. We've got an underperforming bump offer here, let's say, or, whatever, a subpar bump offer, meaning that there is a great likelihood that we can, through dialing in one or more of these assets, we can hit our AOV to CPA ratio, right? Maybe we could get it to break even, let's say, in this example. This is an example of, right, the reason why there's a $21.27 deficit here is because we have one or more marketing assets that are underperforming. And so this is not an economic issue. This is a performance issue. This is about performance with, with one or more of our campaigns. And so what do we do here? Well, we, in fancy language, we identify the earliest campaign constraint. You could maybe make the case, meaning the constraint is the earliest step that is underperforming where it should be. So maybe we make the case that it's this bad boy. And so my point in sharing this with you is that what we're doing through this line of questioning and through this assessment is we are narrowing down what is the cause of our CPA to AOV ratio being off. If it is an economic issue, we're going to look at, well, is it because of the performance of our media? Like we're targeting the wrong people, our click-through rate is off. If we're targeting the right people and our click-through rate is off, then we're going to look at our creative. We're going to look at our images. We're going to look at our headline. We're going to look at our body copy, and we're going to test new creative. If our media performance is where it's supposed to be, right, then we're going to look at price testing because, right, if we've got marketing performing the way it's supposed to, media is performing the way it's supposed to, then we're going to see if we can manipulate the CPA to AOV ratio through pricing, through increasing the value side through pricing. If it is not an economic issue because we've got one or more marketing assets that are underperforming, then what we're going to do is we're going to identify the campaign constraint, the earliest underperforming stage. And that is what we are then going to focus our attention on when it comes to optimization. So we're not going to, like in this instance, right, we're not going to go back and try to create a new whiz bang offer. Right? That's just not the way that we approach it. We're going to focus on what is the constraint, and we're going to see if we can fix the CPA to AOV ratio by fixing the constraint, by dialing in the constraint. Now, the thing to really understand in terms of long-term thinking is that there will always be a constraint in every campaign. Like it's just like the analogy that I've used for years in teaching this and optimization is it's just like a chain link, right? Every chain has a weakest link at all times. There is one weakest link, and the strength of the chain is ultimately determined by the weakest link. It's not determined by the strongest link in the chain. It's determined, it will snap when the weakest link comes under, exceeds the pressure that it can withstand. And so once you take the weakest link and you strengthen it and you reinforce it, well, now there is another weakest link that you can improve. So from a long-term perspective, this process, if we see like, all right, this thing is performing where we want, and now we want to optimize it. Well, ongoing, the optimization is looking at which piece is still the weakest, even though they all may be strong, they all may be performing well. Which one is the weakest one that we can address? And so the high level recap of this is it an economic issue or is it a performance issue? Before I dive in and I immediately start playing around with marketing assets and changing headlines and changing offers and changing leads and releading a campaign and doing all this, I want to start with, is it an economic issue or is it a performance issue? If it's an economic issue, is it a media performance? Like, is the economic issue coming from the performance of our media, or is it coming from just inadequate pricing? Right? Meaning like, it kind of reminds me like, Teddy, I don't know if somebody knows, Lindsay would probably know what an ounce of gold costs right now. Right. Well, an ounce of gold. Well, when I say that it's a pricing issue, it's like, let's say an ounce of gold. What is an ounce of gold? Teddy, how much is an ounce of gold right now? Somebody know? Shout it out.
1900, somewhere in that range.
1900. It's 1900. So a pricing issue, right? A pricing issue is when like there's a $1,900 asset that we're trying to acquire, right? But we're shopping around with $1,000 in our pocket. And the issue is not like that you can't acquire the asset. The issue is that what you're willing to trade, like the issue is that the equation doesn't match up. And so if it's not performance of our media, then we have to adjust our pricing to be able to pay for what the market has determined the traffic is worth. So media performance is all about targeting and creative. Pricing issue is all about price testing, right? Starting with the AOV side or the transaction maximization offer side. If it's a performance issue, it is all about just identify the step, which is the campaign constraint, the earliest step in the campaign, which is the constraint. This is how we go about taking our campaigns and making them gold. Now, I don't want you to think that we can take every campaign and make it gold, because that would not be accurate by any stretch. But this is the approach, the methodical approach that we take to optimization. It's not just a matter of hearing a great idea and then running with it because you've heard that it works for somebody else and therefore let's plug it into your campaign. I've seen so many marketers and entrepreneurs that have campaigns with a low sales conversion rate, and they endlessly work on, let's say, the offer. They've got a VSL, they work on the offer. And then when we do an analysis, which we can do with a VSL, a deeper analysis to see where folks are dropping off, right? We uncovered the fact that 95+% of the people were never even making it to the offer, right? They had a problem with the lead and they had a problem with a part of the marketing argument. Therefore, constantly working on the offer and trying to come up with a new offer. The reason why it wasn't fixing the problem was because they weren't addressing the problem because they didn't do an assessment. That's what this methodical approach is all about. It's about narrowing down what we need to focus on to make it gold.